They buried the wrong man. That's what the message said. Sent from my father's number, while his casket was being lowered into the ground. But the part that gutted me worse? The will filed 2 days before the funeral, signed, stamped, and cutting me out of everything. My cousin Darius already had his claws in the house, the accounts, the legacy my daddy spent a lifetime building. And every time I asked a question, they offered a casserole. But what Darius didn't know? My father kept receipts, real ones, on a laptop nobody else even looked at. And once I opened it, nothing would ever be buried again. My name is Monique Caldwell, and I'm 45 years old. Every morning, I sit in my Limassol kitchen, drinking bitter coffee while my sandals squeak against the granite floors. My father Leonard raised me alone after the divorce, teaching me that principles matter more than convenience. These days, my cousin Darius, Dad's nephew who moved in to help last spring, hovers over every family decision, sliding papers across the table for quick signatures. My stomach churns each time he flashes that salesman smile. But Dad taught me another lesson too. Keep your advantages quiet. In his old gray laptop tucked in the hall closet, every receipt, email, and unsigned draft tells its own story. Let me start from the beginning. I'd been to St. Bridget's Cemetery dozens of times with Dad for Sunday visits to Mom's grave. But this morning, watching the pallbearers position themselves around his casket, my knees could barely hold me up. You know that heavy silence that settles over a burial? It pressed down like a wet blanket, broken only by the soft scrape of dress shoes on dewy grass. The air smelled of fresh clay and cut flowers. Those stark white lilies Dad always said were too formal. A thin fog had settled over the marble headstones, making them sweat in the morning light. Pastor James stood at the head of the grave, his Bible clutched tight, waiting for the right moment to begin. I could almost hear Dad's voice teasing, "Jimmy's got his serious face on today." My phone buzzed in my purse right as they started lowering the casket. I almost ignored it. Who checks messages at a funeral? But something made me look. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was God. The screen lit up with a new text, and my heart stopped dead in my chest. It was from Dad's number. Sent 2 minutes ago. They buried the wrong man. Run! The phone slipped in my sweaty hands. I had to grab it with both to keep from dropping it. Around me, the pallbearers kept their slow, careful pace, chains creaking as the casket descended. Pastor James's voice rolled out across the gathering. Ashes. To ashes. Dust to dust. I couldn't breathe right. Couldn't focus. The words blurred as I checked the number again, comparing it to our old text threads. That string of digits I knew by heart. Dad's cell phone, the one we'd buried with him 3 days ago in his favorite suit pocket. Someone touched my elbow. Aunt Regina, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "You holding up okay, baby?" I nodded, shoving the phone back in my purse. The text burned in my mind while Pastor James finished the committal prayer. I kept thinking. Right after the blessing, I'll pull Regina aside, show her the message, get some answers. But you know how these things go. The moment Pastor James said amen, everyone swarmed in with hugs and condolences. He was such a good man, they said. He's with Jesus now. Call if you need anything. Empty words that filled the air, smothering any chance to ask what was really happening. The sun was setting by the time I made it back to Dad's house. I sat on the front porch, the one he'd repainted every spring without fail, and pulled out my phone again. The porch light clicked and hummed overhead, fighting off the growing dark. My hands shook as I read that message for what must have been the 100th time. They buried the wrong man. Run! Each word felt like a punch to the gut. Wrong man. Run from... What? From who? The phone's screen glowed accusingly in the twilight, showing that impossible timestamp, sent hours after we'd laid him in the ground. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow at breakfast, I'd get answers. Someone in this family knew something they weren't telling me, and I wasn't leaving that table until I found out what it was. The porch light ticked from the cooling evening air, casting shadows that seemed to dance across the message. Dad always said truth finds its way to the surface, like cream rising to the top. I just never thought I'd have to dig for it at his own funeral. The next morning, I pushed through Dad's kitchen door at exactly 6:15 a.m. The room smelled like old coffee and sympathy casseroles sweating under their foil covers. You know that particular scent of food nobody's ready to eat yet? That's what grief smells like in the South. Aunt Clarice was already there, arranging sugar packets like playing cards on the table. Uncle Reggie slouched in Dad's favorite chair, the one with the worn leather arms, nursing what I knew wasn't his first cup of coffee. And there was Darius, looking fresh as Sunday morning in a crisp blue shirt, spreading papers across the counter like he owned the place. The kitchen chairs scraped against the tile as I pulled one out. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk." Aunt Clarice's hands fluttered to her throat. "Baby, it's so early. Have some coffee first. I got a text yesterday." I pulled out my phone, pulled up the message. From Dad's number. The kitchen went quiet enough to hear the fridge humming. I held the phone out where they could all see it. Uncle Reggie squinted at the screen, then laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound. "Girl, you know how grief is," he said, waving it away. "Makes your phone feel haunted, makes you see things that ain't there. It's not grief." My voice came out sharper than I meant it to. "Look at the timestamp. This came through during the burial." Aunt Clarice leaned in, adjusting her reading glasses. "Oh, honey, you know how those scammers are nowadays. They can spoof any number they want. Remember when I got that call from my own house phone while I was sitting right there in my living room?" I glanced at Dad's old gray laptop sitting on the hall shelf, right where he'd always kept it. Nobody else seemed to want to look that direction. Funny how 3 pairs of eyes could work so hard at avoiding one little computer. Darius cleared his throat, shuffling his papers. "Actually, Monique, I'm glad you're here early. We've got some urgent matters to discuss." He pulled out a folder thick with documents, all tagged with little yellow sticky notes. "The estate won't manage itself." That was Darius all over. Answer a question with a timeline, never a fact. "Where's Dad's death certificate?" I asked. He didn't miss a beat. "Still at the mortuary. They're holding it until we get all the signatures sorted out." He slid a paper across the table. "Speaking of which, we need your signature here. Just standard procedure." I left the paper where it lay. "I think I'll head over to the mortuary this afternoon. Verify things myself." The kitchen clock ticked twice. Darius's jaw flexed, just once, just slightly. If I hadn't been watching for it, I might have missed it. "They're pretty backed up right now," he said. "Might be better to let me handle it. I've got a contact there." Of course he did. Darius had contacts everywhere when it was convenient. "Still," I said, standing up, "think I'll check anyway." My chair scraped against the tile again, louder this time in the tense quiet. The clock clicked to noon, and I made my decision. Before that mortuary visit, I had another stop to make. The probate court opened at 1. Plenty of time to see what paperwork Darius might have already filed there. Aunt Clarice stood too, trying to press a plate of something into my hands. "At least take some breakfast, baby. You know your daddy wouldn't want you running around on an empty stomach." I shook my head, already heading for the door. Behind me, I could hear papers rustling as Darius gathered his folders. The sound followed me like whispers, like secrets being shuffled into new orders. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, that message burning through the fabric like a hot coal. Maybe Uncle Reggie was right about grief making phones feel haunted, but grief doesn't make paperwork appear, doesn't make death. Certificates disappear, and it sure doesn't make family avoid looking at old laptops like they might bite. The probate clerk's office smelled like old paper and coffee gone cold. You know that smell? Like time itself getting dusty on metal shelves. "Public records are just down this way," the clerk said, leading me through a maze of filing cabinets. Her sensible shoes squeaked against the linoleum, each step echoing off walls lined with other people's legal histories. "What case number are you looking for?" "I need to check recent filings under Leonard Caldwell." She typed something into her computer, the keyboard clacking like dice being rolled. "Ah yes, filed 2 days ago. Let me pull that for you. 2 days ago? My stomach did a slow roll. That was before the funeral, before we'd even put Dad in the ground. The clerk returned with a manila folder thick enough to make my hands shake when she handed it over. I found an empty table in the corner and opened it up. The first page hit me like a slap. Petition for temporary control of estate. Darius's name was right there at the top, his signature fresh and bold at the bottom. The date stamp confirmed it, filed 48 hours before we'd stood at that graveside. My coffee threatened to come back up as I turned to the next page. There it was, what he'd called an updated will, complete with notary stamps and witness signatures. I scanned through the legal language, my finger running down the page until I found the part that mattered. I'd been completely removed as beneficiary. Every asset, every account, everything Dad had built over his lifetime, it all went to Darius. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I sat there, reading it again and again. Dad's voice echoed in my head, clear as Sunday morning. Nothing would ever cut you out, baby girl. You're my heart. He'd said those words just last month, sitting in his favorite chair, that old laptop balanced on his knees. Something clamped around my ribs, squeezing tighter with each breath. This wasn't right. This couldn't be right. I spent the next hour photographing every page with my phone, making sure each image was clear enough to read. By the time I finished, the sun was sinking behind the courthouse windows, painting everything in shadows that felt too much like omens. The drive home was a blur. I barely noticed the street sliding past until I pulled into Dad's driveway. Darius was there on the porch, like he'd been waiting. Maybe he had been. "We need to talk," I said, climbing the steps. My voice sounded strange in my ears, tight with something between anger and fear. He looked up from his phone, casual as could be. About this." I held up my phone, showing him the photos of the petition. "Who drafted this updated will, Darius? When?" He didn't even blink. "Leonard wanted professionalism in his final arrangements. He asked me to help with the paperwork." 2 days before the funeral? He shrugged, like we were discussing the weather instead of my father's legacy. "Timing is what it is. You should focus on healing, Monique. This stress isn't good for you." The porch light flickered on automatically, sensing the gathering dark. It cast weird shadows across Darius's face, making his smile look more like a grimace. "You really expect me to believe Dad cut me out?" The words tasted like bile. "His only child? People change their minds." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "Sometimes they just don't tell us why." I watched him walk to his car, each step measured and confident. As soon as his taillights disappeared around the corner, I went inside and started forwarding those photos to my email, one by one. The printer hummed to life in Dad's office, spitting out copy after copy of Darius's petition. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, a low growl that matched the feeling in my gut. I laid the papers out on Dad's desk, where he'd taught me how to balance a checkbook, where he'd shown me the importance of keeping records. Tomorrow morning, when the banks opened, I'd have some questions about account access and recent transfers. The thunder crawled closer, and I thought about that text message again. They buried the wrong man. Maybe they had, because the man I knew would never have signed this will. I pulled into First Cypriot's parking lot at 8:57 a.m., watching the security guard make his final sweep before opening. My hands wouldn't stop fidgeting with Dad's old checkbook, the one he'd kept in his desk drawer, filled with his precise handwriting tracking every penny. You know that feeling when you're about to confirm something terrible? When your gut's already screaming the truth, but your brain needs the proof? That's where I was, sitting in my car, waiting for those doors to unlock. At 9 sharp, I walked in and took a number. The morning crowd was thin, just a couple retirees making deposits, and a woman arguing about overdraft fees. I used the time to organize Dad's death certificate and my ID, keeping my hands busy so they wouldn't shake. "Miss Caldwell?" The teller waved me over, her smile professional but cautious. "How can I help you today?" I laid out my documents. "I need statements for my father's accounts. Leonard Caldwell. I'm next of kin." She clicked through screens, frowning slightly. "I'll need to verify some information." 20 minutes of security questions later, she disappeared into the back office. When she returned, her expression had changed. That look people get when they're about to deliver bad news. "Ms. Caldwell, I'm showing significant activity in the week before." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Before your father's passing." My stomach dropped. "Show me." The statements told the story in cold, hard numbers. 6 days. Before the funeral, $175,000 transferred out. 4 days before, another $230,000. 2 days before, the same day Darius filed that petition, the business account was drained. Nearly $500,000 gone. Where did the money go? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. More clicking. The transfers were made to an account held by Cypress Holdings, LLC. I wrote down the company name, my pen pressing so hard it nearly tore the paper. I need copies of everything. While the printer hummed, I pulled up the petition photos on my phone. The dates matched perfectly. Each transfer lined up with a document Darius had pushed through. He hadn't just been planning this. He'd orchestrated every step. Remember those old westerns where the bad guy thinks he's got everything figured out? That's what Darius reminded me of when I called him. He answered on the third ring, all smooth confidence. "I'm in a meeting, Monique. Can this wait? Did you think I wouldn't check the accounts?" The words came out eerily calm. "You're not making sense." His voice took on that patronizing tone he'd used at the funeral. "I know you're grieving, but this paranoia—" "Cypress Holdings, LLC. I cut him off. "Ring any bells?" The silence lasted 2 heartbeats. "I'll have my lawyer contact you." "You do that." I hung up before he could respond. Back at the bank, I filed a fraud alert. Not that it would help recover what was already gone, but it might prevent more damage. The compliance officer, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, scheduled me for first thing tomorrow morning. The drive home felt longer than usual. Street lamps were just starting to flicker on, casting pools of yellow light on the empty sidewalks. I needed help, the kind of help that knew how to fight dirty, when dirty was all you had left. At Dad's kitchen table, I made a list. I'd met Ms. Thelma at church functions and holiday parties. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and could tell you what color tie Dad wore to any meeting. More importantly, she had access to everything, including that old laptop he never let out of his sight. My phone felt heavy as I dialed the number for Martinez and Associates. Pastor James had mentioned them once, said they specialized in complicated family situations. The receptionist answered on the first ring. "We have an opening tomorrow at 6 a.m., she said after I explained the basics. "Mr. Martinez comes in early for urgent cases." I booked it without hesitation. 6 a.m. meant sunrise, seemed fitting to start fighting back as a new day began. I pushed through the glass doors of Martinez and Associates at 5:55 a.m., only to learn that Mr. Martinez was out with the flu. Instead, I got Mark Havel, mid-50s, thinning hair, and fingers stained with ink. His office smelled like someone had tried to cover up old toner with citrus air freshener. "So, Ms. Caldwell," he said, adjusting his tie, "walk me through what we're dealing with." I spread everything on his desk, the petition, the suspicious will, bank statements showing the transfers. My hands were steady now. Funny, how anger can do that to you. "My father died suddenly," I began. No warning signs, no illness. Before he was even in the ground, my cousin Darius filed this petition claiming control of the estate. I tapped the papers. And somehow, there's a new will that cuts me out completely. Havel picked up the will, squinting at the signatures. When was this supposedly executed? 3 months ago. But my father never mentioned changing his will. Not once. The memory of Dad's promise echoed in my head. Nothing would ever cut you out. And these transfers? He gestured at the bank statements. Almost $500,000 moved to Darius's shell company in the week before. I swallowed hard. Before Dad died. Havel leaned back, his chair creaking. "Here's what concerns me, Miss Caldwell. Your case has been assigned to Judge Benton in probate court." "Is that bad?" He drummed his fingers on the desk. Judge Benton and your cousin Darius play golf together. Every Friday at Cypress Hills Country Club. The heat behind my eyes intensified. You're kidding. I wish I was. He shuffled papers, not meeting my gaze. Look, we need to move fast. File emergency motions to freeze assets, demand the original will, subpoena bank records. He paused. But I want you to understand, this won't be easy. Not with Benton on the bench. You know, that moment when you realize the game is rigged, when the rules you thought existed turn out to be suggestions for everyone else? That's what it felt like. Sitting in that cramped office while the morning sun crept across the floor. What are my options? Havel pulled out a retainer agreement. We file everything today. Hit them with so much paperwork they can't keep up. The mortuary, the banks, the witnesses on that new will, we subpoena them, all. I signed where he pointed, trying not to think about how much this would cost. Dad always said justice wasn't cheap, but he probably never imagined I'd be spending his money to protect his money. One more thing, Havel said, making copies of my documents. Has anyone seen your father's death certificate? Darius claims the mortuary has it. That's unusual. He made a note. We'll add that to our priority list. Walking out into the noon glare, I pulled out my phone and dialed Ms. Thelma's number. She'd been Dad's secretary longer than some people stay married. Monique? Her voice was warm, punctuated by the soft clink of teaspoons. I was just thinking about you, honey. Miss Thelma, I need your help. Could we meet today? Before sunset? Something's wrong, isn't it? The clinking stopped. I knew it when Darius showed up with those papers last week. What papers? Come, by around 4. And yes, I'll bring Leonard's spare keys. I pulled up to Dad's house, right as the sun started doing that golden hour dance through the windows. You know the kind, where everything looks like it's been dipped in honey? Ms. Thelma was already there, perched on the front steps in her cream cardigan, clutching her ancient leather purse like it held state secrets. You're looking thin, she said, standing up with that graceful slowness that comes with 70 years of practice. Her keys jingled softly as she hugged me. Haven't had much appetite lately. I tried to smile, but my face wouldn't cooperate. Inside, the house felt different. Dust motes floated through the sunbeams like lazy snow, and everything smelled like those little purple sachets Dad used to keep in his drawers. Remember those? The ones that made all his sweaters smell like lavender and old books? Ms. Thelma headed straight for the hallway cabinet, her sensible shoes clicking against the hardwood. Your daddy, she said, fishing out a ring of keys, was what you might call methodical. Some folks called it paranoid, but I called it smart. The cabinet opened with a soft click. There it was, the old gray laptop sitting right where it had been for years. Just looking at it made my throat tight. He kept copies of everything, Ms. Thelma continued, lifting it out carefully. Contracts, receipts, emails, you name it. Used to say, people forget what they signed, but computers don't forget nothing. We set up at the dining room table, the one where Dad used to spread out his Sunday paper. The laptop hummed to life, the screen casting a blue glow on our faces. Password protected, I muttered, staring at the login screen. Of course it is. Ms. Thelma squeezed my shoulder. Your daddy didn't believe in complicated secrets, honey. Said the best hiding place was right in plain sight. She shuffled toward the kitchen. Let me put on some tea while you think about that. I could hear her opening cabinets, the familiar clink of Dad's favorite teapot hitting the stovetop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard while my mind raced. What would Dad consider hiding in plain sight? Found his ledger book, Ms. Thelma called out, returning with a spiral notebook so worn the blue cover had turned gray at the edges. Might be something useful in here. I flipped through pages of Dad's neat handwriting while my laptop bag churned out copies of the hard drive. Just in case. Dad taught me that too. Always have a backup. Look for anything about transfers, I said, scanning dates and entries. Or shares. Definitely wills. Ms. Thelma settled into the chair next to me, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. I'll start from the back. That's where Leonard kept his most recent notes. The sun crept lower, painting the walls orange, then pink, then purple. We worked in comfortable silence, broken only by the scratch of pen on paper as I catalogued folder names and timestamps. "Getting late," Ms. Thelma said finally, gathering her things. "But I've got a box of office keys at home, and there's an old memory. Stick your daddy gave me last month. Said it was important I keep it separate." She patted my hand. "I'll bring everything first thing tomorrow." "Ms. Thelma?" I looked up from my notes. "Why are you helping me?" "Really?" She paused at the door, her silhouette sharp against the sunset. "Worked for your daddy 32 years. Know his signature better than he did?" Her voice hardened just a touch. "That will Darius is waving around? That ain't your daddy's writing. Not even close." My hand tightened around the pen. "You're sure? Honey, I could forge Leonard's signature better than whatever fool did that paperwork." She adjusted her purse strap. "See you at dawn. We've got work to do." Ever notice how time feels different when you're racing against it? The courthouse clock might as well have been ticking backwards that morning as I waited for the clerk to pull up the hearing schedule. 2 weeks from Friday, 9 a.m. sharp. She didn't look up from her monitor, just kept clicking away. Judge Benton's courtroom, 4th floor. The printer behind her whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet with the official notice. My stomach dropped. 2 weeks? That's all? Standard expedited probate schedule. She slid the paper across the counter. Given the circumstances, the way she hesitated made me wonder just how many strings Darius had pulled. I checked my watch, 1:45 p.m., just enough time to make my bank compliance meeting. The drive over gave me too much quiet to think, too much space to do math. 14 days, 336 hours, each one precious now. First Cypriot Bank's compliance office smelled like fresh paint and anxiety. A woman in a charcoal suit introduced herself as Mrs. Chen and spread my documentation across her desk like she was dealing cards. "Let's start with the timeline." She clicked her pen. "First transfer was last Tuesday." I pointed to the earliest entry. "Then Wednesday, Thursday, systematically emptying every account." She nodded, making neat notes in the margins. "And your father's death certificate? That's part of the problem. I haven't seen it." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Unusual for transfers this size without documentation. We spent the next hour building the fraud affidavit, mapping every transaction like we were tracking weather patterns. Mrs. Chen's matrix looked like a spider web of arrows and account numbers, all leading back to Darius's shell company. "We'll flag these pending investigation," she said finally, stamping forms with precise movements. "But court orders will move faster than our internal process." That sent me straight to Mark Havel's office. Or tried to. The building directory still listed him on the 3rd floor, but the frosted glass door was locked tight. A young receptionist from the law office next door caught my eye. "They're not in today," she whispered, glancing around like someone might hear. There was a conflict arose. She wouldn't meet my eyes. You know that feeling when your chest gets tight and your ears start ringing? That's when my phone buzzed. New email. From Mark Havel's office. I had to read it 3 times before the words made sense. "Dear Ms. Caldwell, due to irreconcilable differences that have come to light, this office must withdraw from representation, effective immediately. All files will be returned within 5 business days. Regards, Mark Havel and Associates." My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely type a message to Ms. Thelma. "Still on for tomorrow's search? Need you more than ever now." Her reply came quick. 6 a.m., bringing coffee and answers. Back home, I spread a calendar across my kitchen table. 14 boxes, 2 weeks that would decide everything. I started filling them in. Bank records review. File pro se motion. Password attempts. Document analysis. Hour by hour, day by day, until my pen ran dry. The sun was setting when my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Smart lawyers know when to walk away. You should too." Hatin. To be Darius. Who else? I thought about all those Thanksgiving dinners, all those family photos where he stood right next to Dad, smiling that snake smile. 14 days to prove what kind of man he really was. I taped the calendar to my fridge, right where I'd see it every morning. Each box was a battlefield now, each hour a weapon I had to learn to use. The hearing date stared back at me in bright red ink. 9 a.m. Truth or consequences? I woke, up at 4:30 a.m., with my mind already racing. Funny how grief and anger can be better than any alarm clock, isn't it? The house was that special kind of quiet you only get before dawn, when even the birds are still dreaming. The whole place smelled like Dad's world. Old papers, coffee rings on desk calendars, and that lingering hint of his aftershave that somehow never faded. My bare feet stuck slightly to the hardwood as I dragged one of the kitchen chairs down the hallway. The cabinet loomed there like some kind of digital fortress, with Dad's laptop sitting inside exactly where Ms. Thelma and I had left it. Yellow sticky notes covered my workspace, lists of dates, names, anything that might crack the code. "Come on, Dad," I whispered, powering up the laptop. "Talk to me." The login screen glowed blue, patient and mocking. I tried his birthday first. 03151948. Access denied. Mom's birthday, 07221950. Nothing. Their anniversary, 09121969. The screen just kept flashing red, each failure like a little punch to the gut. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the lack of sleep. The wall clock ticked away. 5:15 a.m. now. Remember those times when you're so tired and frustrated that even breathing feels like work? That was me, slumped in that kitchen chair, surrounded by Post-its and dead ends. Wedding dates, addresses, phone numbers. I tried. Them all. Each rejected password brought back memories. Dad teaching me to balance a checkbook, showing me how to check tire pressure, explaining why we save receipts. Paper trails tell stories, he'd always say. Just got to know how to read them. The front door lock clicked at 5:45 a.m. Ms. Thelma's key turned smooth and sure, like she'd been using it for decades, which, come to think of it, she had. Her footsteps were soft, but I could smell the coffee she'd brought before she even reached me. "No luck?" she asked, setting a cup by my elbow. I shook my head, throat tight. I've tried everything, every date I can think of. Nothing works. She squeezed my shoulder, her hand warm and steady. "Leonard loved your birthday, you know. Said that day made him a father. Changed his whole world." My fingers froze over the keyboard. My birthday. Not just the date, but what it meant to him. The day Leonard Caldwell became Dad. With hands that suddenly weren't shaking anymore, I typed 1017197. The screen flickered. The desktop appeared. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one," Miss Thelma said softly. Folders filled the screen, dozens of them, all labeled with Dad's meticulous system. Taxes maybe caught my eye. Inside were more folders, each one a year, each one packed with PDFs. "There," Miss Thelma pointed. "Insurance funeral." My cursor hovered over it for a second. Part of me wanted to savor this moment, the last second before knowing for sure. Then I clicked. Emails, draft letters, documents with Darius's name all over them. My eyes caught phrases that made my coffee turn sour in my stomach. Staged event, policy payout, transfer of assets. "Lord have mercy," Miss Thelma whispered. The file names kept scrolling. Transfer, schedule.pdf. Policy, amendment, draft.doc. D instructions, final, PDF. Each one a piece of the puzzle, each one damning in its own right. I couldn't get enough air. The room felt too small, too close. My hand covered my mouth as I scanned document after document, each one worse than the last. You know those moments when the truth hits you so hard it feels like all your bones turn to water? When everything you thought you knew reshapes itself into something terrible? That's what it was like, sitting there in the pre-dawn dark, watching my cousin's betrayal unfold in pixels and keystrokes. Dad hadn't just been keeping receipts. He'd been building a case. The folder opened like a door to hell. Right there, dated 3 months ago, was the first email. Contingency event planning. LC asset migration. My stomach did a slow roll as I clicked it open. You ever had one of those moments where you can't look away even though every instinct is screaming at you to stop? I glanced at Ms. Thelma, who just nodded grimly. The email chain unfolded like a snake uncoiling. Darius had been writing to someone named Martinez at Strategic Solutions LLC, which sounded about as legitimate as a $3 bill. They discussed what they called a contingency death event, like they were planning a corporate retreat. Medical documentation attached per request, Darius had written. Timeline accelerated as discussed, awaiting confirmation of policy trigger parameters. My coffee sat forgotten, going cold beside the laptop. Each click revealed more pieces of the puzzle. Forged medical records showing a non-existent heart condition, backdated signatures on policy amendments, even a detailed schedule for what they called the transition period. Lord, look at this, Ms. Thelma whispered, pointing to a memo dated just weeks before Dad. Before whatever had really happened. The memo laid out exactly how Dad's absence would trigger emergency clauses in his business holdings, letting Darius consolidate everything under his control. Remember how Dad used to say that greed leaves fingerprints? Well, these weren't just fingerprints. They were full handprints, smeared all over every document. My hands started shaking so bad I could barely use the touchpad. That's when Ms. Thelma steadied my wrist with her warm grip. Leonard prepared receipts, she said softly. He knew something was coming. That's why we're finding all this. She was right. The folders were organized with Dad's trademark precision. Every email had its headers intact, showing routing information and timestamps. Draft letters were saved with version histories. There were even screenshots of Darius's calendar with entries like M meeting, policy review, and final steps, transition protocol. We need to make this bulletproof, I said, creating a new folder on the desktop. No one can claim these are fake or tampered with. For the next hour, we built what Dad would have called an audit trail. Email chains exported with full technical headers. PDF documents with their metadata intact. Wire transfer maps showing exactly how money had moved between accounts. Each piece cross-referenced and time-stamped. Your father, Ms. Thelma said as we worked, always said the truth needs good packaging. The sky was still dark when we finished, but I could feel dawn creeping closer. I pulled up my phone and scrolled through local news contacts. 3 reporters had reputations for covering financial crime. Sandra Chen at the Cyprus Times, Marcus Webb at Business Daily, and Kira Thompson at the Regional Herald. My voicemail to Sandra was brief. I have documented evidence of probate fraud involving millions in assets and a suspicious death. Court hearing is tomorrow. Full documentation available. Marcus and Kira got similar messages. Then I opened my email and started drafting the press brief. The subject line was simple. Probate fraud, documents attached. The body was even simpler. Just the basic facts, a timeline, and bullet points highlighting the key documents. No editorializing, no emotional appeals. The evidence could do its own talking. I zipped everything into an archive, triple-checking that each file was included. Then I attached it to the email and set up a timed release for 6 a.m., just enough time for reporters to review everything before the 9 a.m. hearing. Outside, street cats were having their usual dawn chorus, yowling like lost souls. I went through the attachment list one final time. Email chains, medical records, bank statements, calendar screenshots, policy documents. Everything that proved Darius had orchestrated whatever had really happened to my father. Miss Thelma squeezed my shoulder again. Check it one more time, she said. Your daddy always said, measure twice, cut once, I finished with her, managing a weak smile. The file names blurred as I scrolled through them one last time. My phone started buzzing at 6:15 a.m., right as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. You know that moment when you're standing in your kitchen and suddenly everything starts happening at once? That was my morning. Sandra Chen's message came first. Explosive material. Need direct quote regarding cousin's involvement. Available now? I hadn't even taken a sip when Marcus Webb's notification popped up. Documents. Received. Strong story. Can we discuss timeline details before print? The coffee sat there getting cold, again, while I handled their requests. Each reporter wanted something specific. Dates, names, dollar amounts. The kind of details that turn a story from interesting to undeniable. You ever notice how the truth has its own kind of weight to it? My hands were still a little shaky, but not from caffeine. An editor from Business Daily wanted additional corroboration on the transfer dates. That was easy enough. I had the bank's formal confirmation sitting right there in my filing folder, complete with their corporate seal and everything. Documentation attached, I wrote back, including notarized statement from Leonard Caldwell's executive secretary confirming timeline of events. Ms. Thelma had been smart enough to get her statement notarized the day before. That woman thinks of everything, probably why Dad kept her around for 20 years. The fourth email nearly made me drop my phone. It was from the Regional Herald's legal desk. Archive received and authenticated. Digital signatures and metadata verify original creation dates. Proceeding with story. I forwarded them the last pieces they needed. Bank transfer confirmations, Ms. Thelma's affidavit, and a chain of ownership documents showing exactly how Darius had tried moving assets around. Each attachment felt like another nail in a very specific coffin. Standing in my bedroom, I must have tried on 3 different outfits before settling on the Navy suit. The one Dad always said made me look like a judge. Not too flashy, not too casual. The kind of outfit that says you're ready for business. Remember how I told you about Dad's thing for keeping receipts? While I was getting dressed, I printed fresh copies of everything for the courtroom. 3 sets, actually. 1 for the judge, 1 for the clerk, and 1 just in case. Dad's voice was in my head the whole time. Papers get lost, baby girl. Always have backups. The courthouse steps looked different that morning. Maybe it was the early light, or maybe it was knowing what was about to happen. Ms. Thelma was already there at 8:45, straight-backed on the granite steps, her silver twists, catching the sun. She'd worn her good pearls, the ones she saved for special occasions. "You ready?" she asked, like we were about to go into a regular meeting. That's when I saw him. Darius came strolling up like it was just another Thursday. Shoes shined bright enough to signal planes. He had that same easy smile he'd worn at the funeral, the one that said he had everything under control. But here's the thing about control. It can slip away, real quick. A photographer from the Cypress Times lifted his camera, and I watched that $1,000,000 smile crack just a little at the edges. You could almost see him wondering why press would be at a routine probate hearing. My phone chose that moment to chime with a breaking news alert. The headline preview made my throat tight. Breaking. Local business owner's death linked to multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Internal emails reveal. Ms. Thelma touched my elbow. "Deep breath," she whispered. "Remember what your daddy always said about staying steady in a storm." I squared my shoulders and pulled in air that tasted like morning dew and justice. The metal detector beeped as we walked through, and the security guard nodded like he'd been expecting us. Somewhere above, Judge Benton's courtroom waited with its heavy doors and polished benches. The bailiff's voice cut through the buzz. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marcus Benton presiding." I'd been in courtrooms before, but never one this packed. Every bench was filled, and not just with the usual parade of lawyers and clerks. 3 reporters huddled in the press section, laptops open and fingers hovering. You could feel the tension crackling like static before a storm. "Calling case number 2023, PR 147, the clerk announced. In the matter of Leonard Caldwell's estate. Judge Benton settled into his chair, those reading glasses of his catching the fluorescent light. He had that look, you know the one, where someone's trying real hard to seem unbothered. His eyes skimmed the new filings, darting between papers like he was searching for something specific. "Counsel, please state your appearances," he said, glancing at both tables. Darius's attorney stood first, all polished and pressed in his $1,000 suit. James Wheeler for the petitioner, Your Honor. When it was my turn, my voice came out steadier than I felt. Monique Caldwell, appearing pro se, Your Honor. My previous counsel withdrew yesterday, citing conflicts. I couldn't help noticing how Judge Benton's eyebrow twitched at that. Ms. Caldwell, he said, you understand the complexity of probate matters? I reached for my exhibit binder, the one I'd spent half the night organizing. Yes, Your Honor, and I've prepared a chronological exhibit set, Bates stamped and indexed for the court's convenience. Ms. Thelma had taught me that trick. Always make it easy for them to follow the paper trail. The clerk distributed copies while I walked the judge through each chain of evidence. Exhibit A shows the original will from 2019 with my father's verified signature. Exhibit B is the forged version submitted last week. Notice the identical signature, simply copied and pasted. I could hear Darius shift in his chair as I continued. Exhibits C through E. Document bank transfers initiated before my father's funeral, moving assets to shell companies controlled by the petitioner. My finger traced the transaction dates, each one a knife in my father's back. Exhibit F contains email correspondence. Here's where it got interesting. The petitioner approached Wilson Insurance through a broker, outlining plans for what he called a contingency death event to trigger specific payouts and share consolidations. A phone buzzed, then another, and another. The press gallery lit up like Christmas as notifications rolled in. First story must have just dropped. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Benton turned to Darius. These transfer dates, can you explain the timing? Darius stood, and for the first time since I'd known him, his voice wasn't quite so smooth. Your Honor, I acted on my uncle's explicit instructions. Another buzz cut through the room. This time I saw Judge Benton's eyes flick to his own phone on the bench, his jaw set like granite. Ms. Caldwell, he said, you're requesting emergency injunctive relief? Yes, Your Honor. I move to freeze all accounts listed in Exhibit D and suspend any pending transfers until ownership can be properly established. I handed up one final document, a proposed order I'd drafted at dawn. Given the evidence of systematic fraud, I also request the court invalidate any documents submitted by the petitioner after September 1st. The gallery had gotten real quiet, just the soft sound of reporters typing and pages turning. Judge Benton removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and checked his watch. The court will take a 10-minute recess to review these materials, he announced. We'll reconvene at 10:45 for ruling. The gavel crack echoed like thunder. I caught Miss Thelma's eye in the gallery. She gave me that little nod that said I'd done my daddy proud. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe, but I kept my face neutral as the bailiff called, all rise. 10 minutes. After weeks of lies and betrayal, after sleepless nights and endless documentation, everything would come down to these next 10 minutes. The recess felt like forever, but finally the bailiff called us back in. You could have heard a pin drop as Judge Benton took the bench, his face set like stone. Having reviewed the evidence submitted, he began, shuffling papers with measured precision. This court finds compelling proof of systematic fraud and deliberate misrepresentation. He looked straight at Darius. The purported will, dated September 3rd, is hereby declared void. All prior estate documents remain in force. My shoulders dropped an inch. First domino. Furthermore, Judge Benton continued, this court orders an immediate freeze on all accounts listed in Exhibit D, including subsidiary holdings and shell companies identified in the transfer matrix. He paused, letting that sink in. Any transactions initiated after September 1st are suspended pending full forensic audit. Darius's attorney started to rise. Your Honor, I'm not finished, counsel. Judge Benton's voice could have chilled vodka. Given the gravity of evidence suggesting criminal intent, this court is referring the matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of probate fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. My phone vibrated. Then everyone's phones started going off like popcorn. The headlines were hitting. I glimpsed one. Family. Fortune fraud. Cousin's death scheme exposed. Another. Breaking. Caldwell estate conspiracy unravels in court. Judge Benton ignored the buzz. The original will dated 2019 is reinstated. Ms. Caldwell is confirmed as executor with full powers to manage the estate. He looked at me directly. The court appreciates your thorough documentation. The gavel fell. Just like that, weeks of hell ended in minutes. Cameras started flashing as soon as I stepped into the hallway. Reporters shouted questions. Ms. Caldwell, comment on the ruling? What evidence exposed the fraud? Will you press criminal charges? I just shook my head and kept walking, Ms. Thelma right beside me like always. Some victories don't need sound bites. We drove to St. Bridget's in silence. The November wind had picked up, sending leaves skittering across the graves. It felt different now, peaceful instead of raw, like the truth had finally found its home. I knelt at Daddy's headstone, traced my fingers over his name. Leonard James Caldwell. The dates were right this time, carved in proper granite instead of rushed onto some temporary marker. Got you a little something? I whispered, pulling out a single white rose. Ms. Thelma had helped me pick it, said white was for honor restored. I set it against the stone, adjusting the ribbon until it lay just so. The wind caught the tail, making it dance like a blessing. You know what's funny? I used to think family meant accepting whatever story you were told. Keep the peace, don't ask questions, trust blood over evidence. But Daddy taught me different. Taught me that real love keeps receipts, lives in the details, stands up when the numbers don't add up. Ms. Thelma touched my shoulder. He'd be proud, sugar, not just of winning, of how you won. Clean, by the books. I nodded, watching that ribbon flutter. Everything felt lighter now, like I could finally breathe all the way down. No more whispered deals or favor trading, just documented truth, solid as the stone beneath my hands. You know what I learned from all this? I said, standing up straight. Greed buries itself deeper than any grave. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery. But that white rose stayed right where it belonged, marking the spot where truth finally came home to rest.